Hello, everyone. I'm Farzan Ahmed, the Executive Director of the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission. I also serve as the IBTTA Chair for the Global Road Safety Committee. Last year, various members of IBTTA from across the United States and the rest of the world got together to commemorate Road Safety Week. And then we decided that this was an important enough topic that we should do it every year. So this week we are commemorating our second Road Safety Week to talk about road safety from all aspects. Last year's theme was Be Safe Together. And in order to keep everything fresh and in perspective, this year's theme is Be the Highway Hero. A highway hero is someone who is intentional and deliberate about doing the right things to keep themselves and everybody around them safe. And friends, as we talk about safety on the road, one of the things we have to look at is unsafe behaviors. And one of the most unsafe behaviors out there is impaired driving. It is real and it can lead to tragic results. Last year, during our inaugural Road Safety Week, Mothers Against Drunk Driving was a very important partner with us. And I'm so happy to say that they are once again a partner with us as we commemorate our second annual Road Safety Week. I'd like to introduce you to Stephanie Manning. Stephanie serves as the Chief Government Affairs Officer for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Stephanie, as we start this conversation, I have to ask you a question first. You have dedicated your career to fighting for traffic safety and victims' rights. And what keeps you motivated?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the focus on impaired driving and the work that Mothers Against Drunk Driving has been doing for 45 years now, as of this year. It's a great question, what keeps me motivated? And I'll be honest, it's victims and survivors. I've been working with victims and survivors now for 25 years, my entire career, starting with the National .08 BAC campaign in the 90s. That's where I cut my teeth and got to work with some of the original MADD moms and thousands of victims and survivors, taking them to Capitol Hill to share their stories, to share their pain and their trauma that they still live with today. And really helping them express themselves, share their stories, feel comfortable in a space with members of Congress and various administrations to create change. Watching them feel empowered to do that is what really drives the work that I do 25 years later. I carry all of their stories with me in every meeting I do every single day that I come to my job.
You talked about families, you talk about victims, and when we talk about victims, it's not just the person who was affected, but it's their families as well. It's an entire community that is affected when somebody gets hurt from impaired driving. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Now, over the last couple of decades, how have you seen the challenge of impaired driving evolve? And how has MADD's advocacy work changed in response to what we have seen evolve in the last 2 decades?
It's a great question. I think, we have seen the advent of the legalization of cannabis moving across the country. And while we don't take a position on that issue, on legalization, we do obviously take a position on driving when someone consumes any substance that impairs their ability to safely operate their vehicle. And I think we've really started seeing more poly use in recent years. And, over the decades, we've always talked about different types of substances that impair people's abilities to drive safely on the roads and how people need to be aware of prescription drugs they're taking. Maybe if they have one drink and are taking a prescription drug, that could impair them more than they realize. Now, I think with the advent of legalization of cannabis, we have a whole new set of challenges around poly use, around THC, cannabis use, and alcohol, along with prescription drugs. We're really facing a crisis on our roads around all kinds of impairing substances and people really not understanding the impact of those substances on their ability to drive safely. I think the other thing that's happened in more recent years is, and over the course of the past couple of decades, is we've done a lot of what we can in terms of passage of hundreds of laws. People understand drunk driving is illegal, right? And the laws are on the books. We need to make sure they're enforced continuously, constantly. And COVID really changed a lot of that. There were a lot of extenuating circumstances throughout the pandemic where people were using substances more frequently. There was an uptick in mental health issues, substance use issues, and less enforcement for a lot of different reasons that led to a 33% increase in drunk driving fatalities since 2019. We're still dealing with that. We're still dealing with needing to get back to basics, back to traffic safety enforcement of hazardous driving behavior, things that MADD advocated for in the 80s that we're re-advocating for. There's a lot of strain that has been put on law enforcement agencies across the country, resource issues, recruitment issues, while we continuously face substance use issues and poly use issues. So these are all challenges that MADD has to constantly look at, talk with members of Congress about, talk with state legislatures about, new administrations about. I think people think this issue has been solved, and in fact, it's just the opposite. We need to make sure we are constantly evaluating changes in the landscape around impaired driving, educating the public, and ultimately, what led MADD to our latest congressional victory is people drive drunk or impaired because they can. And if people think that they can get away with a behavior and not get caught, they continue to do it. Ultimately, where MADD is going is in-vehicle technology, which will stop the crime before it even happens without penalizing the driver, without getting law enforcement involved. But at some point in the hopefully not too distant future, cars won't be able to be driven by an illegally impaired driver, which is very exciting.
Talk to you about that a little bit more, but Stephanie, I tell you, well, it's scary what I heard from you that there's been a 33% increase.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, with cannabis and with prescription drugs, I know that when MADD first started, the focus was on drunk driving, but it's not just about being drunk on alcohol.
That's right.
We're really talking about impairment, right? We're talking about
correct.
just your inability to drive because there's a substance in your body, either willfully or because you are on some sort of prescription drug, and there has been a reaction with an alcoholic beverage.
Yeah.
Stephanie, is this across the board? Is it young people more than older people? Is it people of a certain demographic, certain income levels, certain educational levels? Because we're talking about intentional behavior here.
Yeah, it is intentional behavior. And there are certain groups that do engage in the behavior more than others. We know that men between the ages of 18 and 34 are traditionally a big part of the target population around these messages. Don't drink and drive. If you drive drunk, you will get caught. A lot of those messages that come from the NHTSA campaigns, different high visibility enforcement campaigns from the Department of Transportation that MADD has worked with the agencies on for decades, getting them funded from Congress, et cetera. And they do help when enforcement is happening on the ground and the public sees messages around those enforcement efforts, those big campaigns. Behavior does change. If people think, wait a minute, I heard cops are going to be out enforcing drunk driving laws this weekend, I better plan ahead, right? Unfortunately, that's still where we're at in this country, that it's the fear of getting caught that changes the behavior, not with certain demographics. Not, wait, I shouldn't do this because I'm putting myself and others at risk on the roads. So I think MADD created a very different narrative around drunk driving starting in 1980 when we put the victims' faces and names, with the crime, right? And that was sort of the amazing thing that happened in the 80s and 90s. And laws were passed, larger enforcement efforts happened, campaigns happened, friends don't let friends drive drunk. The narrative changed, but there is still always a demographic that is going to be harder to reach. And there's new populations, right? The new youth coming in, new generations that need to be constantly educated and taught. Not only is this behavior illegal, but it's wrong. And it's something that you cannot do, not should not do, you cannot do. And unfortunately, we're still not there. And for MADD and our victims and survivors who do this advocacy work, it really has become about okay, let's make it so the crime can no longer happen, right? And that's why we have sort of turned our attention in the last decade or so to in-vehicle passive technology. It's been invented. You know, we got funding for this 17 years ago in Congress to look at, can we invent technology that's built into a vehicle, like airbags, seatbelts, rear view cameras? And there's no consequence for the driver. You're not going to get arrested. A judge isn't going to get the data from your car. We are all about privacy, privacy, privacy. We are simply talking about prevention, preventing someone who is at the legal limit with alcohol use. Now, other drugs, we've got a ways to go in terms of technology development, but we do absolutely know that this is possible. One day, people who are illegally impaired, regardless of the substance, will not be able to operate their vehicle. And there's all kinds of technologies right now that either are developed or are currently under development, whether that's breath-based, touch-based, or other sensors in the car that can determine if a driver is actually at zero point zero 0.08 BAC or above without the driver having to do anything. You just get in your car like you do today. And if you're not at the illegal limit, you go about your business. And if you are at zero point zero 0.08 or above, the car's going to say, hey, you can't drive right now. You need to figure out an alternate way home or wait a while until you're not at that illegal limit. Quite frankly, we have a lot of offenders who have come to us and said, boy, I really wish that technology had been in my car before I killed or injured somebody, you know, that I didn't know, or somebody in my car. Because when you're at zero point zero 0.08, regardless of who you are and how much you drink, your decision-making capacity is not really maximized, and you're making decisions that aren't safe for you, that your passengers in your car, or people around you on the road. And the beauty of this is one day your car will be able to take care of this for you so that you don't make that terrible, terrible mistake, which is also a crime.
Safe to say that regardless of how smart somebody might be, you really can't self-diagnose that, hey, I'm at 0.08.
That's
People
right.
might feel people might feel completely comfortable walking and talking
Yeah.
and interacting, but they might still be under the influence.
Right. And your reaction times are delayed. I mean, there's a whole list that the research for decades has shown. Your decision-making capacity is not what it was when you were sober. And I think there's still sort of a lack of understanding. And again, we've got to continuously educate new generations of drivers. I have two teenagers, and it's amazing to me at this day and age that these discussions haven't permeated through to the younger generation. And at MADD, we're looking at that. How do we get out there again and continuously educate and re-educate? Because the problem is not solved. And alcohol is still the number one substance that causes fatal crashes and serious injury crashes across our country. 13,000 people are killed every year due to drunk driving crashes, and more than 400,000 people are seriously injured. Those numbers are staggering. And if we have built into every new vehicle produced in this country or sold in this country, in-vehicle passive technology to let the driver know, hey, you're at zero point zero 0.08, sorry, find another way home or wait a while. I think, you know, we've seen that 2/3 of the public support the concept of this technology, would want it in their car. And it's just a question of working with vehicle manufacturers, the administration, and Congress to get it done. We will get there, and we do think the public will support it. I have to say, as somebody who's worked on the behavioral safety side for 25 years, the vehicle safety side is just as complicated and involved in terms of when you're requiring all new cars be outfitted with a certain type of technology. It's a big deal. And that happened with seatbelts, that happened with airbags, that happened with rear view cameras. It's happening with automatic emergency braking. It's no small thing, right, to require that every new car sold in this country has a certain safety feature on it. And this one, you know, I understand creates some issues for the auto industry around liability, et cetera. But what we've been talking about with the industry, the administration, Congress, and everyday people is, whenever there's a hurdle to implementation, let's figure out a way past it, because we're talking about saving more than 10,000 lives every year and preventing hundreds of thousands of serious injuries. It's worth it, right? And can you imagine if this was happening in any other mode of transportation? Any other mode? it would never be allowed, right? But there's an acceptance that this is the cost of us being able to drive cars all over the country. MADD is here to say we don't have to accept that anymore. We have a cure, we have a vaccine, and we're really excited for a day where this crime doesn't happen anymore and we can see it.
Definitely, it is about staggering numbers: 13,000 deaths and more than 400,000 people injured.
Yep.
Not to mention the hundreds of thousands of family members that are affected by
That's
somebody
right.
being injured.
That's right.
Um, you know, you said something about people will do things if they know they'll get away with it, and a lot of times people are not choosing to drive drunk because they know they will get caught because somebody has talked about a possible law enforcement sting going on in that area.
Yeah.
Which is so contrary to what I think most of us believe, is that most people want to do the right thing. But somehow the act of being impaired on alcohol and driving has become such a big part of society that people are not seeing that as something that needs to be looked at as a very serious offense. And it is, because it is affecting so many people. Now, what you talked about as far as this technology in vehicles, this is what we call the HALT Act, right?
Yes.
And you said that we'll get there at some point.
We will.
I know that legislatively there's a challenge, but then the other challenge will be that if all vehicles are required to have this technology available by a certain year, it will still be many more years before we have a large number of vehicles.
The vehicle fleet turns over,
because of how long we keep vehicles in America.
That's right.
That will be another challenge to deal with.
Absolutely.
So these are some of the obvious challenges with the HALT Act in terms of implementation. But how does it stay flexible and effective as technology evolves and other in-vehicle safety and implements are added into vehicles?
Well, I think so. The future in terms of impaired driving looks very promising. It's incredible what cars are capable of now. I mean, they're essentially supercomputers on wheels. And the big thing that a lot of folks in the industry are talking about, and you hear in the media a lot, are autonomous vehicles. There are vehicles being tested on open roads without steering wheels, right? Without any driver at all. And so what they're inventing right now in terms of cars of the future, it's absolutely incredible, right? And there will come a day where behavioral safety issues are truly a thing of the past. We're looking to sort of bridge the gap, right, between now and then. Who's to say how many years away we are from fully autonomous vehicles? That's not my area of expertise. But one day it's likely that that's, how society will run, where you can get in a car no matter how you're feeling or what you've imbibed, and you can get from point A to point B without worrying about any of this. But until then, right, we are still a little ways away from that time. Until then, the amazing thing is, victims and survivors at Mothers Against Drunk Driving got a new law passed through a bipartisan effort. We had Republicans and Democrats leading the way, saying, look, until that time where we get to full autonomy on the roads, we don't have to accept this level of death and injury anymore. We can solve this problem now. And there is technology that has been invented with taxpayer dollars and the auto industry. It's a cooperative agreement, the driver alcohol detection system for safety, where the car can passively determine the driver's BAC. It's a breath-based system. It hones in just on the driver, and it's really groundbreaking. The only safety feature that even comes close to saving more than, that surpasses saving 10,000 plus lives a year is the seatbelt. The seatbelt saves more than 15,000 lives every year. And at one point in the 80s, I grew up in New York State. My state was the first state in 1984 to pass a primary seatbelt law. I remember it. I was in fourth grade, and people were complaining about it. People were complaining about needing to wear their seatbelts and how frustrating this is going to be for everybody. And why does the government have to get involved? That was at a point in our country where we had a 13% seatbelt usage rate, and people were dying at much larger numbers because nobody wore their seatbelts. Kids weren't in car seats, right? Now we can't even fathom getting into the car and not buckling our kids up properly or ourselves. We are at an over 92% seatbelt usage rate in this country. It took years and years and years and a lot of effort from the auto industry, the Reagan administration, Elizabeth Dole, and others who really prioritized making sure people understood this will save your life if you put this on. It's such a simple thing. We had to go through a process in this country to accept seatbelts and airbags and other safety features on cars. Change can be hard. This is the next seatbelt, right? That's what we're talking about here. And you can take all of the other safety features on a car and add them up and look at how many lives they save each year. This, you can add them all up and it still doesn't come close to the halt drunk driving law technology that we're talking about. I think it's really kind of creating that narrative around why it's necessary. There are typically 3 to 4 owners of every new car. So when people say, well, I don't drive drunk, why would I want this feature on my car? The only way we get to saving over 10,000 lives every year is if it is on the entire vehicle fleet. And every new car has it, not just consumers that are asked at the dealership, do you drink? Do you think you ever reach point oh 0.08? We're not going to solve the problem that way. It's same thing with seatbelts. Do you think you're going to get in a car crash? Do you think maybe you and your kids should buckle up? It just needs to be standard equipment. And at some point, what I tell my teen drivers who, it was very scary for me to let my kids in cars knowing what I know. Um, you know, Someday the halt drunk driving law will be looked at very much like seatbelts, airbags, rear view cameras. This will be standard equipment. And people will think there was a time where people could drive drunk and kill 13,000 people a year and seriously injure 400,000 people. It's amazing to me because of all the victims and survivors that I work with, whose children are never coming back, whose spouses are never coming back. They're so brave to share their stories, to create change so that others never have to go through this. It is a process, right? Again, I never understood how challenging it would be. We got the law done. That was challenging enough. And we got lots of great support in a bipartisan way, thankfully. But working through the regulatory process, and I get why, right? You're requiring something on a product that is sold all across the country. But what's really exciting is that there are other countries now looking at this law and what we got done here. And they're starting to create change in their countries, in their NCAP standards. If you want to get the highest level of a safety rating, now Euro NCAP has said you've got to have similar kinds of technology that prevents drunk driving, impaired driving on your car if you want to sell it here. So we're seeing that in lots of parts of the world. And I just want to reiterate that it's victims and survivors who share their stories who get this done. And that's how a lot of safety features on cars get done. It's families, the voices of people impacted. Nobody ever thinks it's going to be them, right? Until it is. And at any given moment, when you're driving on the road with your family, especially certain times of the week, certain days of the week, certain times of the day, you have to know you're driving around drunk drivers who should not be operating their vehicles. And it could be your family, right? We're not using scare tactics. We're using raw data to tell you if we're going to solve this problem and keep everybody on the roadways safe, this is the way to do it. And again, going back to what you said, what I share with victims and survivors who are frustrated that it's taking so long, especially people whose kids were killed a few years ago and they know the technology discussion's been happening for as long as it has. What I tell them is, we're going to get there. This is a long road. We're going to get there, and your efforts are going to save millions of lives. So I guess, to your point, the vehicle safety feature side of things is a lot trickier than I think we had imagined. But what we're on is the verge of something very historic and exciting, just like the seatbelt. And again, I can't reiterate this enough. 10,000 lives plus a year, 400,000 injuries. How do we not do this, right? That's the question when people say, well, what about privacy? What about liability? What about this concern, that concern? I say, but how do we not? Let's figure out how to get past the hurdle and get this done because, it's too many lives at stake.
It doesn't have to be If a person has an objection, why do I need a car like this? Why do I have this feature? I don't drink. Some
Right.
people might have a religious aversion to that. It's not about them. It's about the other people who do. As you
Exactly.
said, in order for us to keep all of us safe,
Exactly.
feature. I think this is a great feature. I think this will, I agree with you that this will save lives. It will be revolutionary. How can IBTTA members, first of all, I'm so glad that you joined us again this year.
Thank you
And
for
thank you
having
so much
me.
for your advocacy. But how can IBTTA members help you in making this a reality and having this new revolution in vehicle technology?
Well, you could join the Halt Drunk Driving Coalition. You can go on MADD's website, madd.org/halt, HALT. You can join us in our advocacy network. You can sign up for updates, and we can keep you informed of all the latest and greatest happening on this issue. You can contact your members of Congress and let them know that you would like to see the Halt Drunk Driving law implemented as soon as possible, that you want this prioritized. You can also talk with the administration. We've been having, good meetings with the current administration, who understands the importance of this rulemaking. And, we need all voices at the table. So we'd love your support, and we'd love for your members to reach out to everybody at the federal level and say, we need to get this done, and join us in this fight and this movement.
Through this video, you will have reached all of our members. I know they will listen. I know that our organization, we will sign up to receive updates and join the Halt Drunk Driving Coalition. I want to thank you for your advocacy. I want to thank you personally for your work and your organization that
Thank
does
you.
such good work to save lives. This is about saving lives. Thank you so much for joining us. And this is about being safe together. And our vision is Vision Zero. That's what we are. That's why we are doing this. We want to have zero deaths on the roads when it comes to transportation. That is our mission.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the campaign and for including us. We really appreciate all of your work.